The war room fell silent when Admiral walked in. He moved slowly, his white hair catching the blue light from the star maps. His face carried deep lines, each one a story of battles fought long ago. He was 80 years old and he was still fighting. The officers stared at him like he was a ghost. Commander stood at the head of the table. She was 22 years old, which made her a senior officer among her people. In 3 more years, she would be forced to retire. That was the way. They believed that warriors should step aside while still young and strong. They believed that old age made soldiers weak and slow. Humans believed something very different. "You are Admiral?" asked. Her voice was soft and musical, but her translator made it sound flat. Her 4 eyes blinked one after another as she looked at him. "Our reports said you would be dead by now, or at least in a care home for the elderly." Smiled. It was a patient smile, the kind that comes from decades of hearing the same surprise. "I am very much alive, Commander, and I have no plans to retire." Lieutenant Park stood behind the Admiral. She was 32, which made them nervous. They kept asking if she needed rest. They kept offering her chairs. To them, 32 was middle-aged. To humans, she was barely getting started. "Shall we begin?" asked. He sat down at the table, his old bones creaking slightly. "We have a war to plan." They exchanged looks. Their youngest officer, a male named who was only 19, leaned toward his commander. "How long has this human been fighting?" he whispered. 58 years, whispered back. "He has commanded fleets since before my grandmother was born." Made a small sound of shock. Among the oldest veterans were 25. After that, they were considered too slow, too tired, too set in their ways. They were given honors and sent home to live quiet lives. The idea of fighting for 58 years was impossible to understand. The briefing began. Explained the enemy position. They had built a defensive line across 3 star systems. They had hundreds of ships, thousands of soldiers, and a commander named who was known for his clever tactics. "We strike fast," said, pointing at the holographic map. 3 waves of attack over 6 hours. Our youngest pilots will lead. They are quick and brave. They will not be able to match their speed." It was a good plan, bold and aggressive, exactly what a young commander would create. Listened quietly. He did not interrupt. When finished, he nodded slowly. "May I show you something?" he asked. He touched a control and the holographic map changed. It became bigger, more detailed. It showed supply lines that stretched back decades. It showed patrol routes that had been tracked for 40 years. It showed things that they had never thought to record. "Fleet Master took command 8 months ago," said, "but I have been watching him for much longer. He served under the old Emperor. I fought against him 3 times in 4 decades. Each time, he used the same defensive pattern when threatened." They stared at the map. They had never seen anything like it. Their military records went back perhaps 10 years. Anything older was considered useless history. "If we attack directly, as you suggest, he will expect it," continued. "But if we feint here," he pointed to an empty asteroid field, "he will commit his reserves early. Then we wait 12 hours and strike the real target." Frowned. 12 hours. "Admiral, my warriors cannot stay ready for 12 hours. They will be exhausted." "I know," said gently. "That is why my forces will hold the line while yours rest. We will rotate. Your people fight while fresh, then withdraw. Mine take over. When you are recovered, you return for the final push." But that could take, did the math in his head, that could take an entire day. "It could," agreed. "Wars are rarely won in hours, young one. Sometimes they take days, sometimes weeks, sometimes years." He paused. "Sometimes decades." Sat down slowly. She was beginning to understand something that her training had never taught her. The humans did not fight like they did not burn bright and fast. They burned slow and steady, like stars that refused to die. "How many battles have you fought, Admiral?" she asked quietly. "Thought about it. Major wars, 7, smaller fights, perhaps 300, I stopped counting long ago. And you remember them all. Every single one. His eyes grew distant, looking at something far away. Every victory, every defeat, every face of every soldier I lost. Humans do not forget, Commander. We carry our dead with us. They whisper advice in our ears. The room was very quiet. "To think this war is new," said finally. "But for me, it is just another chapter in a very long story. I have been preparing for this battle for 40 years. I know their commander. I know his tricks. I know his weaknesses." He looked at with kind eyes. "You have youth and speed. I have memory and patience. Together we can win." Looked at her young officers, then back at the ancient human. In 3 years, everything she learned today would be lost. She would retire, and her knowledge would scatter like dust. But this old man would still be here, still fighting, still remembering. "Tell me about," she said. "Tell me everything." Smiled. It was going to be a long briefing, but he had time. He always had time. Captain Myra had served under Admiral for 15 years. She was 47 years old, which made her young by human military standards. Her ship, the Patient Thunder, had a crew of 50 soldiers from 6 different species. She was the youngest human on board. Her first officer was unnamed. 23 years ago, he had surrendered to human forces during a border war. By rules, he should have died of old age long ago. His people rarely lived past 40, but something strange happened when he joined the humans. He kept living. He kept fighting. He kept learning. Now he was 61, ancient beyond belief for his kind. The other thought he was a myth. "The Admiral's plan is crazy," said as they reviewed the battle orders. His mandibles clicked together, making the sound that Myra had learned meant he was amused. 12 hours of waiting. My people will think we died of boredom." Myra laughed. "Your people always underestimate human patience." "My people underestimate everything about humans," leaned back in his chair. "When we first met your species, we thought you were prey. Soft bodies, slow reflexes, weak senses. We attacked your colonies expecting easy victory." "That did not go well for you," Myra said. "No, it did not." His eyes darkened with old memories. "We won the first battle and the second and the third. We thought the war was over, then your ships came back, more of them, better armed. We won again, you came back again, we started to get tired, you did not." He shook his head slowly. "We realized too late what we were fighting, not soldiers, not even warriors, something worse, something that simply would not stop. Your grandparents started that war. Your parents continued it. You finished it. 3 generations of humans, all fighting the same fight, all remembering the same grudge." The ship's mess hall was busy that evening. Myra walked through, checking on her crew. In one corner, she found Ensign Go playing a strategy game with 2 officers. Was 26, the youngest human aboard. They were both older than him, which meant they were both near retirement age. The game was fast and complicated. They were winning easily. Their quick minds and faster reflexes gave them a huge advantage in the timed rounds. They moved their pieces almost before could think. But Myra noticed something. After each loss, wrote something in a small notebook. He was taking notes. "Another round?" he asked after losing again. They agreed happily. They were enjoying their easy victories. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. Slowly they began to slow down. Their eyes lost focus. Their moves became sloppy. By hour 4, won his first game. "That is not fair," one complained. "You tired us out." "That is how humans win," Myra said from the doorway. "We lose and lose and lose. We write down why we lost. Then one day we stop losing, and we never forget how we won." She thought about Admiral, 80 years old and still commanding. He had been losing and learning for longer than most species lived. Every defeat made him stronger. Every mistake taught him something new. Now, after 6 decades, he rarely lost at all. Later that night, Myra reviewed the personnel files of the Allied fleet. The numbers told an interesting story. The forces averaged 22 years of age. The squadron's oldest warrior was 19. Even the who lived longer than most retired their soldiers by 50. The human forces averaged 54 years of age. The youngest combat veteran was 31. The oldest was admiral at 80. But age was not the important thing. The important thing was experience. Every human in the fleet had served with every other human in different ships and different roles across decades of shared history. They knew each other's strengths and weaknesses. They could predict each other's decisions. They moved together like a single mind. They had to spend precious time learning to work as a team. Humans had been working together since before most were born. Myra pulled up the Admiral's service record. Not the official one, but the informal history that humans passed down through generations. It listed every battle he had fought, every lesson he had learned, every mistake he had made and corrected. 58 years of continuous service. 58 years of watching young alien officers come and go. They would learn their lessons, make their mistakes, and retire before they could use what they knew. Then new officers would arrive and start all over again. Humans did not work that way. Humans accumulated knowledge like a river accumulates water. Drop by drop, year by year, generation by generation, until they became an unstoppable flood. Myra closed the file and looked out at the stars. Tomorrow, the battle would begin. They would fight bravely and burn themselves out. Then the humans would step in, slow and steady, and finish what the young ones started. It was not glamorous, it was not heroic, it was just persistence. The simple, stubborn refusal to stop. "We are not better," Myra said softly, repeating words her grandmother had taught her long ago. "We are just still here." The stars did not answer. They never did, but Myra smiled anyway. Tomorrow would be a long day. She was ready for it. She had been ready for years. The battle began at dawn, ship time. They attacked first. Their young pilots flew like lightning across the dark space between stars. Their ships burned fuel at terrible rates, moving faster than anything they had ever seen. In the first hour, they destroyed 3 enemy cruisers. Their victory cries filled the radio channels. Admiral watched from the bridge of the unyielding dawn. His old hands were steady on the command console. Beside him, Captain tracked the battle with calm eyes. Was 61 years old, still young enough to lead ships into combat. "They are doing well," observed. "They always do at first," replied. "Watch." By hour 2, the attack began to slow. Their pilots were getting tired. Their reaction times were dropping. Small mistakes crept into their flying. They noticed and began to push back. By hour 3, they were struggling. Their brilliant assault had become a grinding fight. Young warriors who had never fought for more than 2 hours were now entering their 4th hour of combat. Their bodies were failing them. Their minds were getting foggy. Commander's voice came over the radio. She sounded exhausted. "Admiral, we cannot keep this pace. Request permission to pull back." "Permission granted, Commander. Human squadrons will cover your retreat. Rest your people. We will need them later." Their pilots stumbled from their ships, some collapsing on the deck from exhaustion. 4 hours of intense fighting had pushed them to their absolute limit. They saw the retreat and thought they had won. They pushed forward eagerly, expecting to finish off a beaten enemy. They found the humans waiting. Captain Myra led the patient Thunder into the gap. Her crew moved with the easy rhythm of long practice. They were not as fast as they were not as aggressive, but they were fresh, and they were steady, and they had been fighting together for longer than most had been alive. The battle changed character. Instead of brilliant charges and desperate defenses, it became a slow, grinding contest. The humans advanced step by step, pulling back when pressed, pushing forward when the enemy weakened. They did not try to win quickly. They just tried not to lose. Hour 5 passed, then 6, then 7. The commander, Fleet Master, grew frustrated. His enemy would not stay dead. Every time he thought he had won a victory, the humans would return from another angle. They were like water, flowing around obstacles, always moving, never stopping. "Where are their young warriors?" demanded. "Why do they only send their elderly?" His officers had no answer. As among most species, the elderly were kept far from battle. They were honored for past service but considered useless for current fights. The idea of old soldiers leading attacks was strange beyond understanding. Hour 8 arrived. Admiral had been watching the battle unfold exactly as he predicted. Now he saw his moment. "Fleet Master is getting nervous," he said quietly. "He will commit his reserve forces soon. He always does when he feels trapped." As if hearing the Admiral's words, the reserve surged forward. Fresh ships that had been held back now joined the fight, trying to overwhelm the tired human defenders. Allowed himself a small smile. This was the mistake he had been waiting for. 40 years ago, he had seen make this same error at station. The Fleet Master never learned. "All forces, execute pattern Gamma 7, ordered calmly. "And someone wake it is time for the final push." The human ships shifted formation. They had planned this movement decades ago, practiced it hundreds of times, refined it after every battle. It looked like chaos. To the humans, it was as natural as breathing. The return to battle, rested and recovered. Their young energy combined with human experience. Fresh aggression met patient planning. They found themselves attacked from 3 directions at once, their reserves out of position, their commander making desperate choices. It was over in 90 minutes. After the battle, Commander found Admiral on the observation deck. He stood alone, staring at the debris field that had once been an enemy fleet. His old face showed no joy, only tired satisfaction. "We won," said. There was wonder in her voice. "Yes. Your plan worked perfectly. 12 hours. She shook her head. "My people cannot think in such large chunks of time. We plan in minutes, but you planned in decades." Turned to look at her. In the dim light, he looked every one of his 80 years. "This battle was won 40 years ago, Commander. I saw make the same mistake then. I knew he would make it again. I just had to wait." "How can you wait so long?" "I have no choice. It is all I know how to do." He looked back at the stars. "You burn bright, Commander. I burn slow. Neither way is better. They are just different." Stood beside him in silence. In 3 years she would retire. Everything she learned today would slowly fade. But this old human would still be here, still fighting, still remembering. "I will try to pass on what I learned," she said quietly, "before I forget." Nodded slowly. "That is all any of us can do. Learn what we can, teach what we can, hope that someone remembers." They stood together, young and old, and watched the stars in silence. 20 years passed like water through fingers. Admiral was 103 years old. His body had finally begun to fail him. His legs could no longer carry him to the bridge of a warship. His hands shook too much to operate combat controls, but his mind remained clear and sharp as a blade. He taught now instead of fighting. The Joint Fleet Academy on Earth had given him a classroom, and students from a dozen species came to learn from the oldest military mind in known space. His classroom was always full. "The war," he said one morning. His voice was thin and quiet, but speakers carried it to every corner of the room. "Who can tell me what won that war?" A young raised her hand. Her name was, and she was 19 years old. In 6 more years she would be forced to retire, but for now she was eager to learn. "Human patience," she said. "You waited until the enemy was tired, then struck." Smiled. "That is partly right, but patience alone is not enough. What made human patience valuable?" The room fell silent. The young aliens looked at each other, uncertain. Lieutenant and answered. She was 42 years old, young by human standards. She had served under Admiral Myra for 15 years. "Memory," she said. "We remembered what worked. We remembered what did not work. And we passed those memories down, generation after generation." Exactly. Touched a control and a holographic display filled the room. It showed a web of connections spreading across centuries. This is the human military's memory. Every battle we fought, every lesson we learned, every mistake we made. It goes back 400 years to before we left Earth. The aliens stared in amazement. Their own military records rarely lasted more than a few generations. When old officers retired, their knowledge retired with them. When new leaders took over, they wanted to do things their own way. History was forgotten. Lessons were lost. Mistakes were repeated. But humans kept everything. "They are rebuilding," continued. "They always do. In 20 more years, they will be strong enough to threaten us again. And when they do, we will be ready. Because we remember what worked last time and we have spent 20 years preparing for next time." After class approached the old admiral. She moved carefully as if afraid he might break. "May I ask you something, sir?" "Of course." "Do you ever get tired of remembering?" Was quiet for a long moment. Through the window, he could see young officers training on the academy grounds. Some of them would be dead of old age before his next birthday. He would outlive most of his students. He always did. "Every day," he admitted finally. "I remember every soldier I lost, every mistake I made, every battle I won, and every price I paid for victory. Some nights I cannot sleep for the weight of all those memories." "Then why do you continue?" "Because if I stop, someone else will have to carry this weight, and they will have to learn everything from the beginning, all the lessons, all the failures, all the wisdom that I earned through decades of pain." He looked at her with tired eyes. "I carry the weight so others do not have to." Thought about this. Among her people, such thinking would be considered strange and unhealthy. They believed in fresh starts and new beginnings. They believed that the old should step aside and let the young find their own way. But standing before this ancient human who had spent a century learning and teaching, she felt something she could not name. Perhaps it was respect. Perhaps it was sadness. Perhaps it was a kind of envy. "I will remember this conversation," she said at last, "for as long as I can." "Then it was worth having," smiled gently. "Go, young one, learn everything you can while you can, and write it down, so someone can learn from you after you are gone." That night sat alone in her quarters and began to write. She wrote about the old human admiral who remembered everything. She wrote about the humans who never stopped learning, never stopped fighting, never stopped teaching. She wrote about a species that measured time in centuries instead of years. She did not know if anyone would read her words. She did not know if they would matter. But she wrote them anyway because an old man had asked her to, and because she wanted to believe that some things could last forever. On the other side of the academy, Admiral sat in his own quarters and looked at photographs. They showed young faces, friends and students from decades past. Most of them were dead now. Most of them had been dead for longer than had been alive. But he remembered them, every face, every name, every story. That was his gift and his curse. That was what it meant to be human. He put the photographs away and began preparing for tomorrow's class. There was still so much to teach. There was always so much to teach. And he would keep teaching until his last breath, because that was the only way he knew to honor the dead. By remembering, by passing on what they taught him, by making sure their sacrifices were not forgotten. The night grew late. The stars wheeled overhead, and an old man sat alone with his memories, still fighting the only war that truly mattered, the war against forgetting. Admiral died at 118 years old. He was teaching his final class when his heart simply stopped. His students said he smiled at the end, as if he had finally finished a very long job. The Joint Fleet Academy declared a week of mourning. Representatives from every allied species came to his funeral. even the sent their highest officer, a gesture that would have been impossible a century before. Old enemies stood beside old friends, united by respect for a man who had outlived them all. Admiral Myra delivered the eulogy. She was 94 years old now, her hair white as snow, her back bent with age. But her voice was strong and her eyes were clear. "Once told me that humans are not better than other species," she began. "He said we are just still here. At the time, I thought he was being humble. Now I understand what he meant." She looked out at the crowd. Hundreds of faces from dozens of worlds looked back at her. Other species burn bright. They live fast, achieve glory, and pass on while still young. There is beauty in that. There is honor, but humans are different. We smolder. We persist. We endure. And in that endurance we gather something that no other species has ever matched. She paused, memory. Admiral served for 93 years. He fought in 12 major wars. He made mistakes that haunted him until his death, but he learned from every single one. And more than that, he taught. He passed on everything he knew to generations of students. Human and alien alike learned from him. She gestured to the crowd. "Look around you. His memory does not end today. It lives on in everyone he taught, and everyone they will teach, and everyone who comes after. That is the human gift. That is what we bring to the galaxy, not strength, not speed, not brilliance, just persistence. The simple, stubborn refusal to forget." An officer stepped forward. He was young by human standards, old by his own. "Fleet Master fought against Admiral nearly a century ago," he said. "Before he died, told me that losing to Admiral was the greatest honor of his career, because he lost to an opponent who respected him enough to study him for 40 years. A elder spoke next. She was rare among her people, one of the few who had lived past 30. Her voice was weak but clear. "I am Commander's granddaughter. She told me stories of the old human who fought beside her when she was young. She said him, not his long life, his long memory. She died wishing she could remember more." One by one others spoke. Humans and aliens, friends and former enemies, teachers and students, all united by the memory of one man who refused to stop learning, refused to stop teaching, refused to stop serving. At the end, as the sun began to set, Admiral returned to speak. "His last words to me were typical of him," she said with a sad smile. "He said that the new students were getting sloppy on countermaneuvers. He said page 847 of the tactical manual needed updating. He left notes." Quiet laughter mixed with tears. Even dying, he was still teaching, still remembering, still preparing for wars he would never fight. Myra's voice grew stronger. "That is what it means to be human, not to be the strongest or the fastest just to be the ones who are still here, still learning, still remembering, still standing." She raised her hand in salute. It was an old gesture, dating back to before humans ever reached the stars. "Rest now, Admiral. We will take it from here, and we will remember everything you taught us." The sun set. The stars came out. The crowd slowly departed, returning to ships and stations across the galaxy. But the Academy remained, its lights burning through the night. In a small classroom, a young officer opened a tactical manual. She turned to page 847 and found handwritten notes in the margins. The handwriting was shaky with age but perfectly clear. It explained a mistake that had been made 60 years ago and how to avoid it. It referenced battles that happened before her grandmother was born. It connected past to present to future in an unbroken chain. The young officer began to read. She began to learn. And somewhere, somehow, an old man who had spent his life refusing to be forgotten smiled one last time. The humans had a saying. Other species thought it was arrogant, but it was not. It was just truth, simple and plain. "We are not better, we are just still here." And in a galaxy where species rose and fell like waves, where empires lasted centuries and then vanished like morning mist, where young warriors burned bright and retired before they could grow wise, the humans remained. Still learning, still teaching, still remembering. Still standing,